we thought a lot about articles of clothing that like had a past and had a story, just like we thought about all the objects in the movie that had a past and had a story. So like thinking about clothing that represented the past to a degree. So, Harriet's clothes were a lot of hand-me-downs. If you look carefully, like some of those clothes are the same clothes that Max is wearing, in the past that she's wearing now in the present.
Hello, and welcome back to The Director's Cut, brought to you by the Directors Guild of America. In this episode, a young woman is transported through time by the music she loves in director Ned Benson's romantic drama, The Greatest Hits. The film tells the story of Harriet, who discovers that specific songs can transport her to the past to relive cherished moments with her former partner. But after meeting someone new in the present, she struggles to decide whether to alter the past and reclaim what she lost, or make peace with it and move on. In addition to The Greatest Hits, Benson's other directorial credits include The Disappearance of Eleanor Rigby film trilogy, and the short films Yes, The Westerner, and Four Lean Hounds. Following a screening of the film at the DGA Theater in Los Angeles, Benson spoke with director Marc Webb about filming The Greatest Hits. Listen on for their spoiler-filled conversation.
Hey guys, how you doing? Good. He's doing very well, I can tell. Him, not so much. Weeping over here. Ned Benson, great to be here. Wonderful film. Tell me, what came first? The concept of the character for this piece. Where did it come from?
Well, first of all, thanks for doing this, Mark. 500 Days of Summer was obviously a movie that was a reference for this and something we talked about at Searchlight when we first got into it, as something as a North Star for this as well. But I actually read this book by Oliver Sacks in 2008 called Musicophilia, which is about how music interacts with the brain. And then on top of that, I also have always been profoundly affected by music in terms of just as a personal time travel mechanism. So those two things compounded made me write a draft in like 2009, 2008, 2009 that I put away because it didn't work. And then revisited it in COVID when we were locked down through that lens. And I think in the isolation of the pandemic, the movie started to make more sense to me through this character who is very isolated and, trying to figure out how to live her life again. So
if you remember, what didn't work at the time that you started that ended up did working? What clicked? It didn't have specificity. It felt very like vague. And I sort of was just writing scenes. And I also don't think I was, I don't think I guess to get personal, it's like, I don't think I just relationship wise, I think I wasn't writing it from a good place in my heart, and then I met my wife in 2018 and then I figured out how I wanted to approach it in terms of.
It seems to have this sentiment that, that pain, the romantic pain can have meaning.
Yes, for sure. I mean, I think part of what I wanted to explore is that all our relationships help define who we are. And, we have to let go in order to move on to a degree, and open ourselves up to new experiences, in our lives. So.
And tell me a little bit about the casting. It's a great cast. We were talking before about Lucy, who I had met several years ago. She's fantastic and such as, I think, has a great future ahead of her. How did you put that together? How did that work with the studio? Did they have opinions?
Yeah, they definitely had opinions. I mean, I think we had a list of actors that Cassandra Koulakandis, who's one of the producers on the movie, and I really kind of got into and really looked at, first of all, who was going to be excited by this movie and who, would respond to the script. But second of all, who made sense for these characters. And I think when I met I gave the script to Lucy. She responded. We had a meeting, and we met over on Melrose at a coffee shop, and she walked in the door, and I was like, oh yeah, that's Harriet. So we had this really great conversation, and obviously she's a super talented actor, and I highly recommend working with her.
And Justin and
yes, Justin, Cassandra had recommended to me. We met on a Zoom, and he was going through something personal. He'd lost a friend, and we kind of got into this like deep, vulnerable conversation, and a lot of who he was and what he was talking about really made sense for who the character was. Mm-hmm. And, I'd seen his work in After Yang, and, he's a very special person, a special actor too. So
there seemed to be a kind of, within the film itself thematically, but also in the style of it, a kind of nostalgia, mm-hmm. Which I thought was very appealing. Can you talk about how that came to be, what the choices you made from a design perspective?
I think I definitely wanted to make a love letter to Los Angeles. I think
this is the first movie, I think since, Charlie Chaplin's City Lights that was shot in Los Angeles. Yeah. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. No, and we really had to fight for it. I mean, there were times when we were looking at our budget and they were talking about moving us down to Pomona, and I was like, no, please.
Pomona? Did they have incentives in Pomona?
A street in Pomona that would have been cheaper to shoot. And I was like, please let us shoot here, to the point where I was like, I'll give you my wife and I's place for free. We will shoot in our house for a week for free.
I want to ask which one it is, but I'm not going to.
It's Morris's apartment.
Okay.
So we shot in Morris's apartment for
cool.
a week, and my wife was
that's really generous of
not
you.
To divorce me through the process. So
yeah. And so the LA, I mean, but just to dig into that a little bit more, because I think this is the DJ audience, and I think it's I feel like it's been very difficult, certainly for me to shoot here, and for crews. Many of the conversations I had, that doesn't even enter into the conversation. It's Vancouver, Atlanta.
Yeah.
But were they just if you can, was there something specific about LA that made it?
Well, we applied for the tax incentive. Okay. And then I think once we got it, it felt like we could do that as long as we stayed within the zone. So I think, again, it was being creative in terms of what I could accomplish, and the relationships that I had, whether it was shooting in a friend's house or shooting in our house, and then, getting to shoot in some of down in Boyle Heights in the Sears building, and, some of these other spots that felt, like we were really doing Los Angeles justice.
Had you had personal experiences with these places in LA, or was it did you curate them in a specific way?
I definitely spent a lot of time on the East Side and around 2011, 2012, and loved that part of town and had my experiences with it, but sort of had my own nostalgia about it. So I thought about that as a context for these characters who were, definitely younger than I am, and kind of living in that space, and what that would feel like and what that would look like.
And styling was just in costumes, wardrobe. Mm-hmm. How did you guys put that together?
Again, just lots of imagery, lots of images, lots of
what were your inspirations?
I mean, we looked at even for David, a lot of vintage, James Dean stuff, because I think we looked at him as someone who had a lot of vintage. We thought a lot about articles of clothing that had a past and had a story, just like we thought about all the objects in the movie that had a past and had a story, whether it's the vinyl or the chair or the antique shop or, the hi-fi. All of these things are carrying stories and, elements of the past with them. So thinking about clothing that represented the past to a degree. So, Harriet's clothes were a lot of hand-me-downs. If you look carefully, some of those clothes are the same clothes that Max is wearing in the past, that she's wearing now in the present. So having these things kind of have a dialogue from past to present, and, be carried on, and sort of help define who they are.
And the grammar of the film itself, which is to say the sort of visual language, Chung, your DP, he's fantastic. What a history he's had, especially recently. He just gets getting better at like doing more and more interesting stuff. How did you find him? How did you persuade him to do the movie? What was like, you're doing a lot of time travel. I'm interested to know how you selected, how you chose to dramatize that. And was that something was in the script or that you developed over time?
I think that was something he and I developed with the production designer. I mean, obviously, like I wrote on the page, like it's this crazy, light experience, whatever. And then when you're trying to kind of create that in real life, it's a totally different thing. But I loved Chung's work The Handmaiden, I think is one of the most beautiful films I've ever seen in my life. And we actually used some of the lenses from that movie. There are these hawk anamorphics that I loved that were a bit too soft for us, I think, or soft for the studio. But we wound up using these beautiful Apollo anamorphics that really had a similar quality, and some Atlas Orions that also had a really nice quality to do them a little bit sharper. And really thought about lens flares as kind of this idea for time travel, and kind of using a lot of those flares as elements, flashing, a flashlight next to the camera through these time travel sequences, and then taking those elements after like the practical use of them, and then utilizing it in the post to really enhance the time travel sequences, and make it feel as psychological as possible.
Right. And so when you show up in the morning and you're ready to shoot a scene, have you blocked it out in your head? Have you rehearsed it with the actors? Have you storyboarded it? What's your process about generating the actual, again, the grammar of the movie?
Yeah. So initially before we even shoot, I like a rehearsal week. So we go through the script together. We work through scenes, kind of like do a full read through after we've done like a full rehearsal of each of the scenes with each of the actors and like their scene partners. And then on the day, we have that sort of grammar that exists beforehand. And then, first up, we run a rehearsal, kind of find the blocking Chung and I we basically did a full shot list and had, storyboards as well for a lot of the sort of bigger sequences. But then working with the actors and through a rehearsal and kind of finding it together, and then adjusting or improvising in the moment when something isn't quite working, or, finding what's more organic, through like what the actor instinctually does, in the scene, or at least the rehearsal of the scene, and then figuring out the camera work from there.
There was I thought a lot of big crowd scenes for a more intimate movie. Were you post COVID?
No, we were like a COVID movie. I mean, we basically were testing every day, and I had to wear a mask the entire time. So we were kind of like a sort of later COVID movie, but we definitely were dealing with restrictions and people getting sick. And so like a lot of those big scenes were outdoors. So that was a big thing. And, we could only have a certain amount of people in a certain amount of places, but the outdoorness of it all helped us, because I think if those crowd scenes had been indoors, it would have been an issue. But
and it was, for a movie that was very specific about time and years, you saw the board, you chose to sort of pass over the pandemic, which was, I thank you for that.
Yeah.
But what can you talk about that? Was there a discussion about that?
It's funny because like kind of like it ends in 2020. If you look at the timeline, like 2020 is where it ends. So like that kind of gave us our breaking off point. So I didn't really mention it, but it was 2020 to 2022. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Didn't want to like speak to it.
Did it cause the pandemic? Is that what
who knows?
This time
we still are asking these questions. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The space-time continuum,
All right, great. And so it's Chung, again, like how did you, because he's a very busy guy, like how did you go about selecting him? Handmade, obviously Handmade is wonderful.
Was lucky enough, a DP who I'd worked with before was busy, and so was meeting with or talking to a few different people, and a person who had helped me on commercials before, who's a DP agent, reached out to me, and he was like, he pitched me some names. He's like, Chung Hoon Chung is available. I was like, are you serious? Yeah. And I was like, well, can we get him the script? And he read the script and he loved it. And then we had one of the weirdest meetings of my entire life, because we met at a coffee shop and there was construction on the street. And then there was like construction next door. And if you've ever met Chung, like English is definitely a second language. So like, like once you get to know him, like it's like, but he has worked with a translator a lot in the past, so we were just kind of like looking at each other this entire meeting and like it
was a very visual meeting.
It was a very visual meeting. And I was like trying, and like we kept moving around because like we'd I was like, oh, this is going to be quiet. And then like a drill would go off. I was like, okay, like, and then like he gave me a hug. He's like, we need to make this movie together. And I was like, oh, okay, like great. So we were making the movie together. And he's, by the way, one of the funniest people you ever meet in your life.
I've heard this consistently about him.
Very dry, ridiculous. He's like shooting in Budapest right now. He called me. He was like, I miss you. They don't get me here, like, but he's the best. And he's so wildly talented, like just in terms of just his instinct where, I'll be like, this is what I'm thinking. He's like, that's really cool. But like, what about this? And you're like,
give me an example of that. What do you mean by that? Not to put you on the spot. We can come back to it.
No, I think if I would have an idea about something, well, like for example, there's a whole scene at the beach with Harriet and Max, and it's like one of her big memories. And initially that scene was supposed to take place at night, and it was supposed to be with bioluminescence and like dolphins, and there was like a whole thing. And the studio was like, you're crazy. But we were going to like push forward with it. And I think like the weekend before, he was like, we need to go there. He's like, let's go look at this, because we were doing all these tests with like, fiber optic cable and like all these things to try and create bioluminescence. And he was like, it's not going to read. It's not going to read. And then we went to the beach and like waited out and like kind of experienced it. And he was like, he sort of saw it at Magic Hour, and he's like, here's what I think we should do. We should do a oneer at Magic Hour. And I was like, are you serious? And he was like, yeah, I think like he's like, I promise you, like this will be way better. He's like, the darkness is just going to like, the fall off is going to be horrible. We're going to like lose the scene. There's going to be no depth. Like, just please trust me on this. So I was like, okay, we're going to shoot at daytime. And we started the day kind of late. We did a setup just to like get some protective coverage, like early on. And then we like set up to do, I think, as many oneers as we could get before we lost the sun. And it was a beautiful shot. In fact, it's one of my heartbreaks, because I love the shot so much. And then the studio really fought me like in the editorial process that like, you can't have like a 6-minute oneer in the middle of this movie. But we sort of made it more elliptical and cut it up. But like, it was a beautiful scene, and that was his testament, like just knowing what was going to work visually. And in terms of like what we could accomplish with our camera and what would be more interesting,
And to jump to music for a second, I mean, the soundtrack is excellent, heavily, beautifully curated. The score, I thought, was totally hypnotic, really beautiful. How did that come about? Was that somebody who works with Nelly Furtado?
No, so Ryan Lott worked on my first film, and which I think was also his first film, and we had a great experience together. Like, he's a very special composer. He's like a musician as a band, but like he comes from a classical music background and very, just like great musician. He also did Everything Everywhere, the score for all that. So yeah, we brought him in, but before that, I was working with Mary Ramos and DJ Harvey as like kind of musical consultants on the film, and we were just finding songs that were kind of lyrically helping tell the story or the subtext of each of these scenes, and making sure that was really helping the sort of underneath.
Yeah, I feel it's interesting. I feel like lyrics, you can do things with lyrics that you can't do with dialogue, which is to say they can be a sort of default narrator.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we were doing with the music, and then obviously with mood and representing each character. But then Ryan, we sat down to do the score, and we sort of came up with this concept of overlays and how like the music, the sound design, and the needle drop could actually kind of work off of each other, kind of blend into one. So like it becomes this more interior experience with her or with her and David when they're dancing, or, you know, kind of like finding harmonics in this idea of like frisson, which is like goosebumpy kind of moments, you know, that we could chase throughout the movie. And so the score was really this, you know, it kind of inseparable from the soundscape and the song at the same time. And that was the idea we were playing with.
And then how do you go about choosing the songs have to be so specific, like, and getting those, you have to get the rights to them beforehand, I'm sure. How did you go about that? I mean, how much of that changed and evolved from the script process?
A lot of it was scripted. And then, you know, just Mary really chasing rights and clearing, because we had a budget that we were working with, and she was like, you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. And then, you know, Roxy Music was someone I wanted to work with from the get-go, and they agreed to be a part of the movie. And then we had to work backwards from that budget, that chunk that they were taking. And then my wife actually and I were talking about what's the song they would sing in the car together. Like, you know, if you're like in a car, like what comes on the radio? And she had like a ringtone on her phone that was not the song in the movie, but another Nelly Furtado song.
Which one?
Promiscuous.
Promiscuous Girl?
Yeah.
It would have been perfect.
It would have been good. Different tone though, different tone. This is a more earnest movie, you know?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so like she was like, it's got to be a Nelly track. So we chased a Nelly track, and then Mary called Nelly and was like, well, we kind of came up with this concept like, well, if that track is existing in the movie, it would be fun to have a callback later in the movie where there's a diegetic song playing and it's by Nelly, and it shows Harriet, you know, in her new life working with Nelly.
Yeah.
So that's how she wound up in the movie. She said yes, and like that was a really kind of cool thing.
I remember that album came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Like produced by like Track and Field or like some like I don't know, and it was I mean, she's evolved so incredibly, but I thought that first record was incredible.
It was a huge album, huge song. And, you know, then she did all that stuff with Timbaland, which was great too.
Yeah,
but
of course.
And she's also like the nicest person ever.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
how did you get her? Did you write a letter? Like I remember on 500 Days of Summer, I wrote a lot of letters.
Mary Ramos again had knew her management and like made a call and just had like this connection. Was like, hey, do you want to be part of a movie? And she was like, well, let me talk to this guy. And then we FaceTime. She's like, I would like, before I even like had to make up, she was like, I'd love to do it. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
Has she acted before? I mean, that wasn't a lot. You weren't asking a lot of her, but
I don't think so. But it was really fun. We shot in the studio that Prince recorded Purple Rain into, which was really fun. So that was like a really fun day where like the cast was all geeking out over Nelly, and, you know, like it was great.
That's cool. Now, is there something that like, when you put the movie together for the first time, you get your director's cut, or even you see the editor's assembly, what changed dramatically or differently? What didn't you think, what obstacles did you have to overcome in that process?
This is like an interesting experience for me, just from an editorial standpoint, because like I tend to like give very little upfront as a writer, or like, and a filmmaker. Like I think like I kind of want to unpeel the onion as much as possible. But I think the mistake I made in the script was like, you really didn't get a chance, or at least I kind of underestimated the fact that like, you really didn't need to get a chance to like know Max and Harriet well enough up front. So when we did I think the first screening of the movie, I think people struggled with like investing in this relationship. So the editor, you know, I kind of like cut the editor loose, like for, like after we did the first test, and she came up with, we had this idea to like create a sequence of them together, of their memories, which was never scripted, which is the opening sequence of them at the beach and whatever, that kind of helps you fall in love with them a little bit more, understand the relationship a little bit more, that I probably wouldn't have scripted.
It's interesting. I do think like when it's tricky in a movie like this, where you're so invested in the protagonist in an unironic way. You're not observing them. You want to feel that it does make sense. And it was an interesting choice though, to let you jump in, with her having had this experience.
Yeah.
So you're kind of like, you're sort of circling her point of view before you drop into it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like in this case, you're jumping in media res into somebody's life like after the relationship is over.
And she's had these insane experiences.
Yeah.
Not insane,
so you're having to kind of catch
trippy.
up to it.
Yeah.
Whereas like, I think when we watch 500 Days of Summer, like you meet the two of them meeting each other and you kind of like get to see the relationship from the beginning, which I think sometimes is an easier way to fall in love with people or fall in love with a couple. So,
but you're sort of, it's an interesting kind of balance because you're on the one hand rooting for them, but you have to be rooting for the alternative.
Yep.
For the ending to work.
Yeah.
So how did you balance that?
I think that was the ultimate trick that we needed to figure out, which is like, how do we kind of find as even a ground as you can be where you realize that she loves both of these people kind of like simultaneously. And that's kind of the heartbreak. It's the Sophie's choice of like, well, yes, this is like the first love of my life, but like, it's not technically real anymore. And like, if for her to engage into life again, she has to make this gift of the Magi kind of sacrifice, in order to move on with her life and even be, function as a human being in order to like meet somebody like David. I think David opens her eyes to that. But the whole other thing is that it's an analogy for relationships in general, is that like we have these relationships in our lives and then we break up with someone and we do become strangers again, and I think that's what happens. And so that's the analogy that you're playing.
I think it's a peculiar thing and I think it's something that, audiences are more and more interested in metabolizing, that you can have multiple adult relationships, and it's not something that I think you saw a lot of. And I think it's an interesting thing to explore, that kind of, and without one being a disaster necessarily.
Yeah. I think like the idea that I was playing with is that we do have the capacity in our hearts to love more than one person in our lifetime, or like, when you reach a certain point, like you can be happily married and be in love with somebody, but know that all those prior relationships helped you get to this place, where you can be healthy.
Yeah. And we were talking before, it's obviously an earnest movie, a heartfelt movie, which feels off trend at the moment. What do you think's happening right now? And it's not about a judgment. I just think it's, and when I was doing 500 Days of Summer, there was a kind of a raft of earnest movies. And I feel like we haven't seen a lot of those lately.
Gosh, I don't know.
Maybe Past Lives is a great romantic sort of earnest movie.
Past Lives is a beautiful movie.
Beautiful movie. Yeah.
I mean, I think, gosh, I don't know. I mean, like our culture is in a weird place right now. I mean, I think
what makes you say that?
It's a rough year, we're in right now, like moving towards November, but and just everything that's going on in the world right now. I think it's, I don't know. I find there's a lot of cynicism out there. And I just wanted to make something with, my heart on my sleeve, in the face of that. But, there's definitely, to steal from Cameron Crowe, like we live in a cynical world sometimes. So,
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks so much, Ned. Wonderful film. Thanks for having me. And thank you for coming out on a Sunday night. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for being here. Appreciate it, buddy.
Thanks for listening to another DGA Q&A. The Director's Cut is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And please share, subscribe, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your feedback, and you can help fellow film buffs find the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. This podcast is produced by the Directors Guild of America.